My name is Jennifer Fernjack, and in 2016, I got the surprising diagnosis of a meningioma brain tumor. And I say surprising because I literally had no symptoms that I was aware of. No headaches, no speech impediments, no motor skill problems. It was literally my eye doctor, as part of my annual eye exam, who acted on a hunch after noticing that I didn't do as well on my peripheral vision exam, that she said, I think you should go to a specialist. And so I then went to a specialist, and he in turn took pictures of the backs of my eyes, and acting on a hunch, just like the prior doctor, he said, I think something might be pushing on your optic nerve. I want you to have an MRI. And I didn't think twice about it, because as I mentioned, I couldn't feel any symptoms. So I then had the MRI, and the very next day, that's when I got the diagnosis of the brain tumor. And it turns out that the tumor was about the size of a golf ball, and it's in the front part of my head. So hitting the optic nerve, actually it was on the outside of the brain in the lining called the meninges, and partially encasing the carotid artery. And so that's why the neurosurgeon was able to remove half of the mass, but the remaining half got radiation. And the tumor itself wasn't cancerous, but the thought was that the radiation would try to either stun or kill the remaining cells that are there. So, you can't make this stuff up.
Wow.
So this is amazing how it's not just what you know, but who you know, because I work in the financial services industry, and I'm on a question writing committee where once a quarter, before COVID, of course, I was traveling somewhere in the US. And somebody on my committee heard from somebody else that I had had surgery for a brain tumor, and apparently her dad did as well. And so she came up to me and said, hey, there's this organization. There's actually a separate organization for brain tumor research that goes to Washington, D.C. every year and meets with people on Capitol Hill to make an awareness of the need for funding for brain tumors. And when I was there, I met people from Minnesota who attend the Brains Together for a Cure support group, and then of course to the annual fundraiser, because at this event in Washington, D.C., we all sat by state. And so I sat at a table with people from the Mayo Clinic and people who have brain tumors who are from Minnesota. And so I got to know a lot of people. And since then, on a monthly basis, I've either gone to the Brains Together for a Cure meetings in person or now, of course, virtually. Well, a lot of reasons, but two come to mind initially. First and foremost, the fact that the organization, especially with this fundraiser in the fall, part of the whole mission statement and the values is, of course, to raise an awareness of brain tumors and the need for research. And the unique thing about my particular kind of brain tumor is that there's a lot of ambiguity as far as what causes them. Some people say that they're not genetic, others say they might be, you're not sure. But for me, with my particular circumstance, my aunt also had surgery for a meningioma brain tumor. And here I had just visited her in the hospital a year before I was in the hospital, not knowing that I'd be the one, in the hospital a year later. And so I want to be a part of an organization that believes in funding the research, being an advocate for people, being an advocate for people who aren't even at the meetings or at the fundraiser, because it's important to have people have a voice with this kind of thing. So my mom and I did the walk last fall, and to me, it was a great way to have a sense of community. There were caregivers there, and brain tumor patients and brain tumor survivors, people from all walks of life who are very passionate about the same cause that I am. And I know as my mom and I walked around this indoor track, it was funny because different people wore different kinds of t-shirts, like representing who they were there on behalf of. And there was one group of people who I saw from behind where on the backs of their t-shirts, it read, "I'm with Jim." Then the next person, "I'm with Jim." And then "I'm with Jim." Well, then finally I saw the last person on the back of his t-shirt, it read, "I'm Jim." So you knew there was that sense of camaraderie. And there was also another person's t-shirt that I read from behind that was a little bit more somber, but a great reminder. And I'm paraphrasing, but it read something to the effect of, "You never know how strong you can be until being strong is the only thing that you can do." And basically it kind of gives that notion that that you have no idea until all of a sudden life throws you a curveball, what you're made of. You know, you can either keep your head in the game and try to stay strong, or be more of a passive person and kind of wonder what if. And for me, one of the things that I enjoy about the Brains Together for a Cure monthly meetings is that you have a lot of value on multiple levels. So for example, the people who facilitate the meetings who are also on the board or the board of directors. You know, one person in particular, her husband had a brain tumor along with somebody else in her family. So she knows firsthand what it's like to be a caregiver and all the emotions and the psychology that comes with that. And of course, she also saw firsthand what happened to her family members who had the tumors. There's also someone who facilitates the meetings who works at the Mayo Clinic. And so she does a lot of reading. And so oftentimes at these meetings, she'll say, you know, hey, I just read this article about this certain kind of brain tumor. And then she'll say, you know, what do you guys think of this? Or what's your experience been with that? And she'll kind of help stimulate the conversation so we can learn from each other. And then also there oftentimes will be physicians from the Mayo who attend. I know one in particular is a neuro-oncologist, and oftentimes, you know, we'll ask questions and he'll have the presence of mind to take a really scientific concept, whether it's a type of tumor or what causes them or different things, put it in layman's terms, and then have great metaphors, you know, so we can actually go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so, and then of course, beyond even just learning from the people who facilitate the meetings, there's also value in learning from each other. I know there are a number of people who have named their brain tumors, so it puts a little bit of humor in there. And of course, by adding that element of humor, it offers a form of control, like a sense of control, because you think, you know what, there isn't this ominous thing in my head. It's, you know, whatever you name it. So that helps. I know also for me with my story, I've tried to provide examples of perspective for people. So one of the things that I talk about is how there's a picture of me where I had the stitches in my head. I mean, they were top of my forehead down to my left ear. And so this one particular picture, you know, not particularly flattering. I had part of my head shaved and the stitches in there. Well, then the next picture, the stitches had been removed. And you could see the little spots, like little scabs where the stitches were, where the hair is beginning to grow back. And I remember when I had showed a friend of mine these pictures, he looked at the one where the stitches had been removed, and he goes, oh, Jen, no offense, but that's kind of creepy. You know, I'm getting kind of lightheaded when I see that. And we laughed about it. But I thought, you know what a great example of perspective, because what was creepy to him was beautiful to me, because the picture showed I was healing. And by having that glass is half full kind of a mindset, which is of course an art, not a science. I mean, we all have good days and bad days. I've been able to kind of share that perspective with the other people in the support group. And I learned from them as well. This is going to sound crazy, but I'm being completely legit. So as I mentioned earlier,
I love it.
As I mentioned earlier, you know, I got my diagnosis over the phone. And so over the phone, having that conversation about the MRI and the results, initially it was almost like talking about a third party, because I had no symptoms that I could feel, you know. And so I thought, okay, I'll treat this call like a business call, you know, and I got out a pad of paper and a pen, and I asked lots of questions and took copious notes. But then literally within seconds of getting off the phone, that's when the emotion hit me. And I literally curled up in a ball on my bedroom floor, and I was sobbing, and my mind just went from 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. And I thought, am I never going to get married again? Am I going to go blind? Am I going to die? And after about 10 minutes or so of laying there just sobbing, I thought to myself, you know what? I can't let this consume me. And I thought, actually, I won't let it consume me. So I got out my pad of paper and my pen again, and I actually made a list of reasons why it's positive to have a brain tumor. And it started out with, like, maybe I'll lose some weight. And then it got into, you know, maybe I'll need a hot single doctor. And then it got a little bit more somber as I wrote such things as, you know, good reminder to count blessings, or a good excuse to reach out to people I haven't seen in a while. And by having this attitude of gratitude, yeah, I wasn't in denial of my circumstance. I just wanted to have a voice in it. And that voice gave me a perceived sense of control. And that mindset gave me a sense of hope. as far as, knowing that here in the US, we're so fortunate to have hospitals with phenomenal, people working at them and great technology. And so for me to have access to that stuff, that's a privilege. And I'm very, very grateful. And it helped carry me throughout this whole process. Lots of hope. Well, and I can also tell you that one time on an airplane, I met a stranger who served in Vietnam. And I was telling him about my journey with the brain tumor, because obviously I still have half of it in my head, to this day, and hopefully it's dead. But on an annual basis, I have an MRI to check on it. But as I was speaking with him, he said, hope can actually affect you physically. And I said, well, I know that firsthand, but what's your story? And he had mentioned that when he was in Vietnam, that he worked with medics who were on the battlefield, literally holding soldiers who were dying in their arms, but then noticed a material difference in their vital signs once those soldiers heard the helicopters that were coming to save them. Hope can affect you physically. I mean, it literally made a difference in their vital signs. So if you can have a sense of hope, whether it's small or large, that can help carry you,
Yeah.
And another thing too that I want to note is sometimes I'll tell people that whether it's a brain tumor journey like myself, or a journey that deals with work stress or relationship issues or just, different kinds of stress, I'll suggest to people, rather than feeling overwhelmed by what may lie ahead of you, look backwards and see how far you've come. And, for me, I'm grateful that I got my diagnosis because I had no idea that I had a tumor growing in my head, so I'm grateful that I got the diagnosis before it got even to be a bigger tumor. I'm also grateful that I had the surgery and survived it. I had been warned that during surgery, I could have had a blood clot or a stroke or gone blind or even died, but I didn't, and so after that, when I had the respective radiation sessions, I was very grateful that even though initially the machine was kind of ominous and I was nervous, I tried to flip the script in my mind and think, I'm grateful that I get to do this, because if I didn't have access to this technology or the people who know how to work it, I would still have a mass in my head, and so it's interesting when you can try to do that cognitive reframing, as it's called, that flipping of the script, you can help yourself in that regard.
So cool.
One thing that I've heard from so many people, whether it's a caregiver or a brain tumor patient or a brain tumor survivor, is that with brain tumors, oftentimes, the outside person can't see them. So if you hypothetically, say you're in Target shopping, and you happen to see someone who's wearing sunglasses, and it's the middle of the winter, and you're thinking, well, why does that person have sunglasses on? Like, what are they, plus they're indoors, like, what are they doing? Well, maybe they have a brain injury and the fluorescent lights are hurting their mind or their head, or maybe they have soft tissue damage from having a brain tumor surgery or what have you. So I've learned to give people the benefit of the doubt, first and foremost. But then beyond that, a lot of people who I've spoken with who've had brain tumors have talked about how sometimes they almost wish as though they had some kind of a crutch or a cast or a cane, something tangible, so that other people could see it and know to cut them some slack. They're not trying to be lazy, or they're not trying to do whatever it is that's bothering someone. But it's different when you have an injury that's on the inside and people can't see it. So just, I guess, give people cut people some slack.
Cut people some.
That's something else that I should call out about the Brains Together for a Cure fundraiser, is that it's a great chance, even though it's virtual this year, of course, to have that sense of community and feel less isolated during COVID. It's one thing to be at your house by yourself, especially now that a lot of us are having to work from home. But it's another to actually have that camaraderie that comes with an event like this and to feel less isolated. It's really important to resist the temptation of just withdrawing, from everybody. And that can be said for those of us who, have the brain tumor, or the caregivers for that matter, where there can be a lot of emotional, psychological, mental, just stress and different emotions that come with this. And some people might feel that they don't want to talk about it around family because they don't want to feel like they're possibly burdening them, when really maybe the family members are open to wanting to listen to it, or people have the option of coming to a support group like the one that Brains Together for a Cure offers. And I know I tell people oftentimes that even though we can't control the quantity of our lives, it's empowering to know we can still influence the quality of them, and having relationships and that sense of community, plays a huge role in that. So I'm a firm believer that one of the important considerations for funding for brain tumors is that a lot of people have brain tumors and don't even know it. You can literally have something growing in your head like I did for years. I mean, I may have had mine for decades and people just don't know. And by educating people and by doing research to figure out, okay, for people who don't have one, but maybe later would develop one, maybe they could prevent it. Or in my case, I still have half of one in my head. Well, I don't want it to get any bigger, so if funding for research could take place, additional funding, then I could try to educate myself through that to go, you know what, I should stay away from XYZ so my tumor won't get bigger. And by proactively being able to do research on tumors, we can then save money after the fact that would go towards surgeries or some kind of therapy or different types of things. I mean, you're literally investing in people and saving money at the back end. I think that people oftentimes don't realize that in life, whether it's being a part of a support group or just your everyday life with your family or in the working world, that there are things that can help take the edge off your experience. So as I alluded to earlier, laughter helps. Something such as naming your tumor, takes the edge off and gives you kind of a sense of control. And laughter, it turns out, can actually affect us physically as far as influencing the reward center of the brain. Whether it's your dopamine or your serotonin or your endorphins. The same thing can be said for gratitude. So like when I made my list of reasons why it's positive to have a brain tumor, even though it's a kind of a counterintuitive concept, I later learned that by having that mindset of gratitude, I'm influencing those reward center chemicals in the brain. And that's also why a lot of times hospitals encourage people to make gratitude lists or keep gratitude journals when they're in intensive care units. If you can take something and have a role or have a voice in how you perceive it, huge difference, huge difference. Support group meetings for Brains Together for a Cure include caregivers. I mean, a lot of times people think of just the patients and the survivors of brain tumors, but the caregivers, I mean, they've got a lot going on as well. Again, from a psychological, mental, emotional, all that kind of stuff perspective. So I'm glad that they're recognized. When we used to have our meetings in person before COVID, the caregivers and the brain tumor people would all be in the same room initially, and then we break into two groups. And that way the caregivers could kind of just be in another room and learn from each other and feel supported. And then in our group, we had the brain tumor survivors and patients as well. And great way, again, to have a sense of community. And it was also nice in that nobody proclaimed to have all the answers, but we were just there to listen to each other. It's hear each other out. And it's one thing for somebody to have empathy for somebody else, but it's a whole other level of comfort when someone can relate to you. If someone can go, oh yeah, I experienced that as well. You feel acknowledged and you feel heard if somebody else can relate to what you're talking about. And that's what the support groups offer. Quotes that I'm going to be including in my book, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's from Mark Twain. And he said something to the effect of, there are two important days in your life. The first is the day that you were born. Well, I'm going to cry. And the second is the day that you find out why. So if my brain tumor scare can serve as a beacon of hope for others, then I can honestly say I'm grateful that it happened to me. So it's good stuff. When you can get a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning out of something in life that you didn't anticipate, it gives it a sense of purpose, and you can justify it. You know what I mean? And I'm okay. This has happened to me, because people are learning from it. So